how to nail a Zoom interview. I made the PowerPoint nice and bright because I needed a little bit of sunshine in my life today. So let me share my screen. But yeah, to that point, I'm super laid back. So like, please feel free to stop me at any point in time. Should you have any questions or need clarification, I am totally open to that. Feel free to unmute at any point in time. Okay, so virtual interviewing, right? What a shift. So thinking about, it's even been a shift for me to be able to communicate kind of the do's and don'ts of virtual interviewing, because I'm very acclimated to the in-person based interview, right? So that definitely has been a transition in and of itself. But let's jump on in. So thinking about how to prepare. So a lot of the preparation pieces look really similar to that of an in-person interview. So I think the top one is super important, and I think it's the hardest one, right? It's that confidence piece. So going into an interview with confidence and feeling positive in hopes that that is just going to help for a really awesome interview. Truly, I think that the confidence lays the foundation for a successful interview. And I think sometimes it's challenging to get to that point because there are, it's hard to know what to expect with interview questions. It's weird meeting people for the first time sometimes. So I think that being mindful that that confidence piece is the foundation and really kind of drives the success of an interview is something to be mindful of from the very first start, or from the start of preparing for an interview. The next point is researching the organization. So this is super important. You don't want to roll into an interview, obviously saying, oh my gosh, what does Vanguard even do? No, no, no. Always make sure that you're doing research on the back end, pulling up as many resources as you can to be able to do that. And I will always recommend printing out the job description because essentially that's everything, right? So I call it the gospel of the in the career world, because truly job descriptions are strategically written to kind of showcase what you're going to be expected to do, what the job requirements are. They use keywords, buzzwords, etc. So making sure that even outside of researching the organization, that you spend a lot of time reading through the job description so you fully understand what the job fully entails. And then you want to confirm all details. So even before, so specifically thinking about a Zoom interview, since that's what we're discussing today, making sure that you have the Zoom link, making sure that you have the password, even trying to make sure your internet is working well that day, right? So confirming all the details, giving yourself some time to prepare. So again, you can go into that interview not feeling rushed or not feeling late or like you're, because that is not going to bode well for the confidence piece and the positivity piece. You want to also prepare questions to ask the employer. So the rule of thumb here is 3 to 4 questions prepared to ask the employer. I have some like a question list coming up towards the end of the presentation today, which can kind of help showcase what some options are. And then success stories. So you really want to, essentially with an interview, you're storytelling, right? So you're trying to link your experiences to the experiences that they're looking for specifically in a job position. So you want to have some examples that, so think about the top job requirements. The top 5 job requirements usually encompass a majority of the work that you'll be doing. So so if teamwork is one of the top things they're looking for, think about a success story that you have that really kind of conveys that teamwork skill. So it's really important to have some examples prepared because again, that's just another way that you can kind of convey to the employer that you have this experience, you have these skill sets, etc. And then practice literally as much as you can. There is no such thing as too much interview practice because again, obviously now we're preparing for a virtual based interview. So interviewing is always changing and shifting. And I think that virtual interviews are going, even outside of a pandemic, I think that it's going to be just this convenience factor. So I guarantee that we'll see more and more Zoom interviews as the time goes on. So taming your tech. So this is probably the first and most important step of, thinking and considering Zoom-based interviews. So you want to test your video and microphone capabilities the day before your interview to ensure that the best version of your virtual self is represented, right? So there is, and I know we'll kind of discuss this in a few slides, but really thinking about the Zoom world is totally different. It doesn't always feel as natural as being in person, right? So for instance, like even when I'm technically looking at the screen and I can see myself in the video, but on your end, it likely doesn't look like I'm making eye contact with you. So it's not as natural to maintain that eye contact with an employer in a virtual environment. So again, making sure that you feel comfortable and confident with that before going into the interview. Make sure all devices needed to communicate for the interview are ready and functional, right? So making sure that you have your laptop charger, making sure that your microphone is working, that it's clear, right? That there's no distractions in the background. Those are also super important considerations to make before the interview. If your technology happens to malfunction or your internet connection is unstable, communicate and advocate to conduct the interview through an alternate method, right? So this is, I think with the Zoom environment, there's a lot more understanding and flexibility. So should you have any issues relative to, unstable internet connection, or your computer is lagging and it's just not cooperating with you today, make sure that you communicate that to the recruiter ahead of time. Environment, so equally as important. Obviously, the Zoom-based interview is going to be totally dependent on tech. So that's why we talk about the taming your tech as tip 1, but tip 2, shaping your environment. So it's important to find a quiet, isolated, and organized spot, which allows for good lighting. It's really interesting for me, even to be totally transparent. So I'm Zooming from my basement right now, but I have this really obnoxious light overhead. And if I was in an interview or doing an interview, I like to not sit in this space just because the light is not the best. So just something to be mindful of. Maybe there's a quiet place that you can find within your home, or a workspace, like whatever works best for you, but just something additional to be mindful of. And for those living in large households, inform, roommates prior to the interview and advocate for space which provides the qualities above, right? So let your roommate know that, hey, I have this interview this time frame, I need some quiet space, and maybe the roommate can go out for a little while, right? And again, equally as important, so depending on your living situation, so if you have young children at home, feel free to communicate that to the interviewer. Again, that flexibility piece, it has to be there because we are all, obviously we're in the middle of a pandemic right now. So there are so many different layers to this. So I think that understanding piece is there. It's just a matter of communicating that to the recruiter. So utilizing those communication skills, 1, to advocate for yourself, but 2, to kind of have that open discourse with the recruiter ahead of time, just to loop them into all parts, I think is important. So if somebody does end up, all the time, I have little people at home, they end up bursting through this door right here behind me. So sometimes I will kind of give that disclaimer ahead of time, even in presentations, letting you know, I have young children at home. Please don't be worried if they come in. I will try to shoo them out as fast as I can. I oftentimes mute myself, so it's not like this huge distraction for others on the receiving end. But those are things you can kind of set the precedent. And I think that's really nice about Zoom interviews. Prepare and practice. So again, as I mentioned, there's no such thing as too much preparation and too much practice, because interviews are ever evolving and ever changing. So something to kind of keep up with and be mindful of. So you want to research standard and specialized interview questions depending on your area or industry that you're pursuing. And it's obviously important to set aside time to prepare question or answers for each question using platforms such as Big Interview, which I'll go into a little bit more detail with. And then that confidence piece, right? So it's kind of a delicate balance. So conveying the right balance of confidence is key to convincing the interviewer that you're the right one for the position. I hear from students and alum all of the time that they worry about, being too confident. So falling under that title of being cocky going into an interview. And I think that it is a delicate balance, right? There's a lot, you're kind of toting the line a lot of the times. And I think that, one, in our society, it's really tricky to be able to talk about ourselves and to highlight all the awesome things that we're doing. So I think even kind of getting over that discomfort and being able to talk about how awesome you are, how you're the ideal candidate and all of your awesome experiences, that is just the right amount of confidence, right? Obviously, you're not going to be like, yes, I'm literally the best engineer that has ever lived. There's no one who even compares, right? So toting that line and finding that delicate balance. Questions so far, Sarah?
No, it's clear. Sorry, I'm just going home.
Oh, you're totally fine.
Yeah, okay. I'm with you.
Awesome. So thinking about types of question, right? So there's such a range. This is not a all-inclusive type list. Employers prefer different things, so that makes it even more important to practice as much as you can and to familiarize yourself with what sorts of questions are they typically asking. Are they resume-based questions? So are they glancing down at my resume, asking me to give more information on XYZ experience? Or are they getting to know you questions? I will say probably 98% of the time, each interview starts with that question of tell me about yourself, right? Because they truly want to get to know you. They want to understand your experiences. They want to understand your passions, your long-term career goals, short-term career goals, etc. So they're getting to know you. I mean, they're trying to figure out why you would be the perfect fit for, their organization and the position that you're applying for. So really sell that to them. And then behavioral based questions, those are probably a majority of the questions that you'll encounter in an interview. And so these typically lead with statements like, tell me about a time, describe for me when, etc. So this is really where the storytelling pieces come in. And the STAR method is a really great way to kind of approach the behavioral based questions. So thinking about a question such as, tell me about a time when you worked well on a team. Okay, perfect. So take me through the situation, take me through the tasks that were involved, the action, and the results. Sometimes you can go into an interview setting and say you get caught off guard with a question that you weren't expecting. It happens all of the time. And maybe you get nervous and you don't really know how to respond and you're kind of struggling to answer. Consider the STAR method. Again, because the STAR method will allow you to kind of keep structure in your response, but it allows you to bring in all the different components for an answer, right? So again, storytelling, taking me through from start to finish. So this was a time that I worked well on a team, describing the situation, bringing in the details, thinking about what did you do, why, elaborate on the specific action, and then results, always bringing in the results, because this is the part where you can convey accomplishments and how it was successful. You can kind of if you can give any sort of quantitative data, obviously that is awesome too, because that can just further convey your success. So some common interview questions are as follow. So ranging from tell me about yourself, what is the knowledge of our company, what are your greatest weaknesses, what is an example of your greatest professional achievement, right? These are all kind of sample questions. And my recommendation would be to write these out or type these out, and then think about specific examples that you have for each question and how you would format these answers, right? So if you essentially write yourself a script, then you can in turn practice that script and feel more comfortable and confident in your responses. So some awesome, obviously with the Career Development Center, we do offer, so I'm going to jump past Big Interview for just a second. So within our office right now, in this virtual environment, we are holding Zoom-based appointments as well as phone-based appointments, and we do hold mock interviews. So mock interviews are usually 60 minutes in length, and that is quite literally just role-playing an interview. So we would go back and forth. So I would ask you an interview question, you would respond, and then we could debrief. So it's not me grilling you with questions by any means. It's truly meant to be that learning experience, allowing you to spend time with the questions, allowing you to practice your responses and get that feedback real time, right? So then that leads me into the next point of Big Interview. So Big Interview, and this is the unique URL right here. Big Interview is our online mock interview platform. It is awesome. And I have another slide specific to Big Interview next, but this is a really great resource to practice your interview skills to perfection. And then outside of Big Interview and mock interviews with our office, we do have tips and tricks available on our website, so feel free to check those out as well. So Big Interview. So as I mentioned, this is our online mock interview platform. So there are two different phases of Big Interview. There's the learn phase and the practice phase. So even before you jump into practice, you can go through the learn phase to really kind of see, what are the recommendations for how to approach interview questions. It's really helpful. There are so many video tutorials in the learn phase, which are awesome. So that's definitely a good place to start if you're like, oh, I don't know if my confidence is just at that practice level yet. And then you can get into practice. You can practice by industry, competency, you can practice for admissions interview or just general questions. You could even do interview roulette. So you can set that up to kind of not know what interview questions are going to come next. And then you can just kind of prepare for that thinking on your feet type question. So this is the setup of Big Interview. So you'll be prompted by a fake interviewer with a question. So for instance, what are your weaknesses? And then you'll have the opportunity to respond and record your response. And I know it's not always super comfortable to watch recorded response or to see yourself on video because you're like, has my voice always sounded like that in real life? Oh my goodness, this is horrifying. But it allows you to pick up on some of the things that we'll talk about in the next few slides. So, the volume of your voice, your eye contact, some of those nonverbal body language cues, just as important. And I think this is a great way to really practice for the Zoom interview, because obviously with this being an online mock interview platform, it resembles a Zoom-based interview really closely. So some additional interview question tips. So thinking about this idea of an interview script, right? It's not to lead right into this first bullet point here. An interview script is not so you're robotic and monotone and just kind of reiterating and regurgitating the things that you've written down, but rather, so instead of memorizing your answers word for word, use Post-it notes. Place them on the side of your computer, the side of your laptop, post them on a wall behind you, just allowing you, even if it just says, a specific example for teamwork, right? So maybe you write down that specific example on the Post-it note and you hang it up for yourself, just for when that question comes up. That Post-it note can trigger a thought, and then you're like, oh, right, this is what I wanted to mention. It's really kind of helpful and allows you to keep additional structure and to be mindful of all of the things that you wanted to mention in an interview. So yes, practice your responses, but don't rehearse them word for word because you don't want it to come across monotonous. A lot of times, the biggest recommendation I've heard from employers is that interviews should be conversational, right? So there should be that back and forth dialogue. So say you practice your response to the point of it being robotic, and then midway through your response, an employer interrupts for you to tell them more about something that you had already mentioned, and it throws you completely off. Whereas you can practice your response, but again, don't rehearse them word for word. Have them be kind of fluid and organic, and that way it can feel more conversational and less robotic and monotonous. And taking your time. So if you don't know the answer right away, it's totally okay. You can always take a moment to think about it. And I think that one of the other things, so outside of talking about yourself, the next most uncomfortable thing is likely embracing the silence. I can fully appreciate that. But I would say it's better to take a few seconds to formulate your thoughts than to give an impulsive response and to not have it well thought out. Whereas if you give yourself a few seconds, you could say something along the lines of, let me think about the best example I have for that question, or wow, great question. And then give yourself a few seconds to kind of ruminate and think about what example you want to pull from. It's okay to take those few seconds. And it's from the employer side of things, they would rather you do that to have an informed response than the impulsive one. And then keeping your responses concise, right? So it's funny because on one hand, I'm telling you that you're telling a story, but on the other hand, I'm telling you to be concise. But you can storytell in a concise manner, right? So you don't want to end up responding to a question for 6 minutes, but I would say like that 30 seconds to a minute and a half is like the fair game time frame. And honestly, that's a good amount of time to be able to convey your thought, convey your response. And obviously the STAR method, as we already discussed, is the perfect example and the perfect way to kind of stay structured in your responses, to keep them concise and to kind of keep them on track. Because a lot of times I hear from students and alum that they'll go into their responses to interview questions and then they end up going down these tangents, or they end up kind of just babbling, and that's totally okay. I'm guilty of that 100% too. But just thinking about something like the STAR method to keep you structured in that response. And dress for success, right? It's funny because I think I've even talked with students as of late, especially as they were preparing for our job and internship fair. They were like, well, what do I wear? I'm like, well, technically you could wear pajama pants on the bottom and like a nice blouse or a nice shirt on top. But obviously dressing for success, I think I even recommend to students to dress for success for a phone interview, because I think there's something that, in dressing for success, there's something that happens with your confidence piece, right? Like you feel confident in that awesome new blazer that you just bought specific to the interview. So I think that those things really help and they matter. So I would say dress as you normally would for an in-person interview. Obviously, no, they may not see your nice khaki pants that you're wearing or your really nice closed-toed shoes. But I think that it's important to kind of be in that space to feel prepared in that sense. So definitely something to consider. So obviously consider a blazer, dress pants, blouse, dress, skirt, etc. Anything again that you would wear for an in-person interview or for a work day. Refrain from choosing flashy colors and keep your wardrobe selection simple yet refined, right? So I think the struggle with Zoom sometimes is that yeah, embracing natural light is really hard. And I would say just stick with some of the more, like basic colors, nothing too flashy, nothing too bright, just because you don't know how that's going to be received on the employer's end, the interviewer's end. General makeup, again, should be on the natural side as well. Refrain from bright colors for lips and eyes, just because, again, like the lighting is really different in a Zoom-based interview than it would be for an in-person interview. Body language awareness. I think this is probably one of the most challenging things of Zoom-based interviews. So how to build that connection without shaking your interviewer's hand, right? So maintain eye contact. That's probably the best way to be able to do it. I know it's really different on Zoom because again, you're being mindful of looking at a camera, you're being mindful of what you want to say. There's so many things to kind of keep straight with a Zoom interview. So that can just be an added layer of challenge. But again, that maintenance of eye contact displays confidence, and the interviewer is going to be more invested in that interview by the eye contact. Sit up straight, keep the camera at eye level, and smile, right? So again, like these are very similar things that we recommend for in-person interviews as well. Obviously, like you want to be comfortable in the space that you're in. So I would say try to find a position that you're not fidgeting around a lot, something that feels comfortable and good for you. And then limit distractions in the background. So if you notice, likely the chances are that the receiving end is going to notice as well. Sometimes not the case. I feel like I had some trees that were being cut down a few weeks back, and I reiterated to folks that I was on the call with, I was like, oh, not sure if you all hear that in the background. And much to my surprise, they did not. But you want to limit distractions as much as you can, because again, the point of the interview is for you to be able to convey your experience, skills, and why you're the ideal candidate for this position. So you don't want distractions to take away from that. Here are some recommended questions that you could ask the interviewer. So anything ranging from, again, so to reiterate, 3 to 4 questions to ask at the end of the interview is usually fair game. I would say 100% of the time, the employer is absolutely going to ask you what questions you have for them. And having questions prepared speaks to your level of investment in this position and in this organization. So you could say something along the lines of, what are your company's long-term goals? How would you describe the ideal candidate for this position? What are the strengths and weaknesses of the organization? That's probably one of my favorite ones, because that's a real conversation starter and it really allows them to, the gears start turning and they really start to think about it. Will I have the opportunity to work alongside other departments? Can you walk me through the steps of the hiring process, or what is the next step of the hiring process? What are the training and professional development opportunities? Or even if, so say during your research, but while you're preparing for the interview, you stumble upon something on their website that sounds really interesting. Like say for instance, an employer is getting ready to launch a new technology. You're like, wow, that sounds really fascinating. So you could also ask questions of genuine interest. That is absolutely fine as well. And then after the interview, so super important, within 24 to 48 hours after the interview, you want to send a thank you for your time and consideration. And then these are other points that you can kind of make in this reach back out when you reach back out to them. So reemphasize one of your strongest qualities. I've even had students and alum reattach their resume for context, draw connections between the position and your skills and experiences, explain why their organization is the best fit for you, reiterate your interest and passion in the position, and then tell them that you're looking forward to hearing from them soon, right? It provides that personalized approach. And I think it is one step of the process that is often forgotten, but it's really a super important part because it just kind of brings it all together, right? And if it is a position that you're interested in or passionate about, say is like your top choice, then yes, I would say even if you're in a group-based interview. So there's multiple people on the interview. You could always send a personalized email to each one of those individuals, because again, that just shows that you've taken the time. This is something that matters, this is important to you, and this is not just another job application. And then Handshake. So where to kind of go from here. So I know that was a lot. Hopefully answered some of the questions that you have relative to Zoom-based interviewing, but some next steps. So just being mindful that even as an alum, you can utilize all of the services at the Career Development Center. And the way to do that and the best way to kind of access a majority of those things is through Handshake. So Handshake is a one-stop career shop. So this is our career management software. This is the unique URL here. By all means, if you have questions, say you're not on Handshake, feel free to reach out to me to be able to log in and to access your account. But through Handshake, this is where you schedule all appointments with our office. So this is where you'd be able to schedule your mock interview. This is also where you can find the link directly to Big Interview. This is where you can upload your resume. So once you upload your resume, it automatically comes to one of us in the Career Development Center, and then we provide feedback right back through Handshake. So we can give you some tips on, hey, these are things that you did really well, or these are areas you could improve upon. This is also where you can apply to jobs and internships directly, research employers, check out upcoming events, and so much more. But this is, I think this really kind of brings everything together really well, and allows you to kind of consider what your next best step is. So whether that's a mock interview to kind of practice some of these skills, or to practice the Zoom-based interview, or utilizing Big Interview, all available through Handshake. I know that was kind of quick and to the point, but what questions do you have, Sarah? Is this kind of what you're looking for today?